Okay, welcome. So my name's Jan, and today we're talking about opening opposition. Right. Coming. Now, on the way down, Anat, Will, and I were being driven down by this fine young gentleman, Michael, who's quite tired now as a result. What we decided was that whilst first proposition is something where Will is going to give almost a lecture outlining why first prop is in fact very easy, we thought that there would be 3 people in this particular first op session. In fact, it is 3, 6, I'm not counting Derek, so we have 9. The aim of this is going to be more a workshop, so actually a conversation between us about various scenarios in which you can find yourself in first opposition. Because there is no single rule for first op. It's not like first prop where you have control over the debate. In first proposition, this is why we think it's very easy, or those people who debate for a long time just think first prop is the easiest thing because everything is in your power. Unlike that, first opposition is the one which requires perhaps the most flexibility, because you don't really know what's going to happen until the first person stands up and says, this is going to be our case. Obviously the motion is a fairly good guide as to roughly where you're going to be, but over the hour we'll be talking about what you do, first of all, just with standard motions. We'll start with the really simple stuff, but I'm not going to spend very long on that because I'm assuming that the majority of you have debated and know what the first opposition's role is. So this isn't going to be you stand up and you give 2 minutes rebuttal and then you give your counter prop if you want it. It's not going to be that, but I'll very briefly go over that. Then it's going to be a series of questions that I'll ask you about what would you do with this specific motion, and then offer my advice. And involved with that will be when to choose a principal case, so when to go, in this debate, we've been given these principles by first proposition, and we are going to play with them on those principles. When you might want to take a more practical approach and derive principles from those practical objections to a first proposition case. And we'll also talk about burdens, because often the burden that you're given by first proposition, first prop will say, look, if op can prove this, well then they'll win. How to deal with burdens on opposition. And I'll give you again some ideas as to when to actually make your burden more difficult for yourself. One, you might do that because there isn't very much material on your side. And 2, because it makes you look cool. Because you then take on, if you like, the proposition's mantle, if you take on an extra burden, and it leaves proposition a speech down, having to then become opposition. We'll talk about that if that's too confusing at the moment. But it's going to be, if you like, complex first op, as opposed to just stand up, rebut for 2 minutes, then outline why it's not going to work, then outline what the bad consequences are, and then offer your counter-proposal, which is, I'm sure you all recognise, the standard first opposition. One thing to bear in mind, increasingly in debating, there are 2 types of motion. One type of motion is the type of motion that Derek or I would set, and that is the real-world motion. In the real world, should this happen. Increasingly, as we saw at the European Championships this year, there is a school of thought which says we should have debates which are set in Magic Land. And in opposition, there are certain strategies that you need to take on in order to debate in Magic Land. And so we'll talk about that, when to identify a debate as a magic debate, for example, only arming women, so only allowing women to bear arms. I hope you understand it's clearly a Magic Land debate, how to then have that debate. So let's start with the very simple stuff. Are there any questions at this point about anything that I've said so far? No? No. Okay, cool. Right, so first opposition, how many of you are fairly new to debating? Fairly new, okay. Let's start then with just the really, sort of very quickly, the first thing that I would expect from you at this tournament if you're debating in first opposition as a standard first op. If the motion is, say, this house believes that Turkey should be admitted to the EU. Standard motion, right? It's very much the real world. And proposition have stood up and have given a fairly standard motion, standard definition. They've said, within, let's say, 2 years, Turkey should be admitted to the EU, they should be given this many votes in the European Commission, we don't think that that should be more than Germany or Poland, we recognise the population is an issue. They then go on to outline the reasons for why that is a good thing. One, because Turkey is a youthful and dynamic population which will offer various skills which would not be offered by the current labour market. Two, that it is a bridge to the Eastern world. And three, that if we keep on pushing Turkey away, that they will eventually turn to alternatives and that will be damaging. Now, in first opposition, the very standard case, your opening gambit, is to then say, look, one, we don't think that this is going to work, that you're going to be able to do this. Two, that even if you were able to do this, there are going to be a series of negative consequences to doing this, and then you'll run through those series of consequences. And then three, you will offer some kind of alternative, potentially. You don't have to, but more often than not, you would find that you would want to. So in this case, it's not going to work, might not last forever, because this isn't really a mechanistic question. It's not so much, well, can you do this? Is it possible in a given world for you to do this? What you might want to say, of course, is we simply don't think that there is the political will for this to happen. Also, you haven't even talked about the need for referenda in Austria and France. So either you want this to be a principle the EU should, but you never said that, at least recognise that there are many countries who have demanded referenda if Turkey were ever to enter the EU. However, let's play ball with you, because otherwise the debate ends right now, because we're just saying it's impossible. Let's accept that it could be possible in this world. And let's almost make this a should we or should we not do this. Then you come up with your consequences. Now, you have options in First Op. You can either have a separate rebuttal section at the start of your speech, but I would suggest that the very first speaker for First Opposition doesn't need to do that. It depends how comfortable you feel with hitting on the things that have been said by First Proposition, but your consequences are quite likely to be, anyway, mapping what they say. Quite likely. If you feel, for example, that you can't map their bridge to the east argument in your speech, then place it in rebuttal. My suggestion would be, given that prop, that you would place that in your alternative section, and you'd say, guys, given that, by the way, this is not going to be a motion at this tournament, just in case you wonder, because I'm giving you all the arguments. But if you have alternatives, it's very likely that NATO is going to be one of your alternative mechanisms, or that customs union, so the status quo as it stands, offers a lot of the ways in which you offer a bridge to the West, or the United Nations, where Turkey is a member of the Security Council at the moment. I can't think of a way in which you would have an argument that would fall outside. But that's something to bear in mind. That is a decision for you to take as a new debater who's sitting down and doing First Op for the first time. Do you have the type of brain that can basically, in about 4 minutes while they're speaking, ensure that you are responding to their case within your pre-existing structure as you thought it was going to be? Because one would imagine that as you write your speech, you go, right, why would this not work? Are there any reasons for this not working? Okay, what are the negative consequences of taking Turkey in? At that point, when you go, what are the negative consequences of Turkey going in? You look at your stakeholders. This is something that, incidentally, I will talk a lot about in extensions, because do you all know what stakeholders are? Yeah, stakeholders. Anyone who is involved in this. So, as a First Op team, you're going, right, who are the stakeholders here? Who is affected? Turkey, the European Union. And then if you want to go deeper, you could say Turkey's wider region and perhaps the Islamic world. And then you might want to go even further down to individuals within those countries. So an individual in Turkey, what are their rights? Should they have the right to free movement of labour?